I think we are definitely core 8, so I think we'd better get going. Hello and welcome everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to be with you all at the end of TCLP's second hackathon. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Becky Clissmann, Senior Editor in Practical Law's Environment Team and a member of the TCLP core team. And how to summarise the event that we've had, I don't know. It's been a real challenge to try and do that. I'm going to share some slides with you now. If I can share my screen and it works. I'm always bedeviled by this from the beginning. Are you seeing that now in presentation mode? If somebody could just stick the thumbs up, that would be great. Are you seeing that in presentation mode?
It's in presenter. It's in presenter mode, not presentation mode.
Okay. No, that's no good. Let's try that again. And no, that's the same problem, isn't it?
You go to the top display settings, the middle option at the top of your screen.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, if you open the slides to show again from the beginning.
That's what I'm clicking on, and it's.
And then at the top of that screen there.
Display settings.
Swap.
That should be it. Great. Brilliant. Thank you for whoever was helping me there. So, how to try and summarise the 24 hours that we've had so far? I have got some key numbers for you, but that didn't somehow feel enough. I want to give you an idea of the spirit and the energy of this event. It has been amazing. I took a brief break from the fun to have a couple of hours sleep last night. And when I woke up this morning, my husband said, well, so how was it? Because of course, none of my family had seen me for pretty much the guts of 24 hours already. So I tried to give him a potted summary of what had been going on. And I found myself describing the buzz of just connecting with so many people across the world who have an interest in the climate and doing something about it. And then also just the inspiration that was provided to us by our opening plenary speakers, Lorne Carnworth, Stephen Brinkenmeyer, and Elizabeth Beestrom. And then I moved on to talk about the power that even the smallest drafting groups had, where you saw brilliant and committed legal minds just quietly considering how they would go about either creating new content or using these clauses in their jurisdictions. And it has been absolutely amazing to watch the passion of our originally UK-based community travel across the seas and light up the climate passion in other jurisdictions. That has just been amazing. Now, my husband is Irish, so I didn't need to tell him that the Irish were having savage crack working on these clauses in Dublin. But I did tell him about the focused determination of my practical law colleagues who are translating TCLP's content to be relevant in a US context. And I also told him about the way that the Australia Pacific teams had re-energized us as we sort of got into the wee hours over here. And to be honest, when we logged onto the America's APAC handover, it was literally like walking out into the sun. It was just this blast of energy, and I really felt we had moved out into the sunshine. And then, of course, I went to bed and the rest of you all carried on. But when I got up this morning, it didn't stop there. So when I rejoined the hack, I found not one, but 2 Olympic torches had made their way into our Zoom room, courtesy of Zali Stigl and Trisha Duffy. So I've already alluded to the fact that we've had 2 key themes here at the hack this year, looking at not only creating new content, but how to use TCLP's existing clauses. And we've looked at everything from climate-aligned boilerplate clauses to carbon budgeting. We've had a sectoral focus looking from energy and infrastructure right the way through to rewilding, ecological restoration and debt finance. And I thought I would just give you a little bit of feedback that we've had already from the hack so far, and a few of my favourite comments. So I think probably my absolute favourite was somebody who said it was an invigorating and energising experience, literally making them feel alive. I felt like I'd woken up. And that really struck a chord with me, because that's how I felt when I came to this project. I suddenly realised it was something I could do as a lawyer about an issue that I care about so passionately. And then someone else said, why are we investing time on this? Quite simply, because the world is changing at a pace and more heads are better than one in finding the best solutions. We want to help create legal documents and solutions which work for all. This is about collaboration for the greater good. And then someone else said very, very kindly, I was really impressed by the methodology you used to get people thinking creatively and collaboratively to tackle the issue of climate change and challenging the norm. I really enjoyed seeing the next wave of established and upcoming construction lawyers applying their skills and experience and take ownership to tackle a global problem. And then someone else also said, being involved in TCLP has been amazing. I can use my skill set as a commercial lawyer and what I do on a day-to-day basis to fight the climate crisis. I want to pause here a moment to talk about the wall. So this is something that all the TCLP core team will be familiar with. Last year, at the first hackathon, we had this moment at the end of the day where we all stood and we looked at all the ideas that had been stuck up in the room, obviously on a physical wall. And just posted in the chat now, hopefully will be the links to our Airtable ideas gallery and the origin story gallery, which I think most of you will have seen throughout the course of the last 24 hours. But I'd like to take a moment just in silence for you all just to flip through it all again and just look at the ideas that are there. Look at all the energy and ideas and commitment that is evidence there. So let's just take a moment in silence to do that. So I'm going to move you on now. Here with me to talk about some of the key themes and some really good ideas that have come out of the hack in the last 24 hours are Diane Harris, who's a partner at MDY Legal and seconded to the Private Infrastructure Development Group as General Counsel. Zaneta Sedilekova, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is a hackathon facilitator extraordinaire and Clyde & Co trainee. And last but definitely not least, Sarah Oliver Scemla, Director and Assistant General Counsel at Bank of America. So Diane, can I ask you just to say a few words about the themes and ideas that you think have come out of the hack?
Yeah, thanks, Becky. Firstly, I'd just like to say I found it absolutely incredible. I didn't take part in last year's physical hackathon. Took part in the hackathon earlier this year, which was on a slightly smaller scale. And I just find it incredible that I went to bed last night and there were 83, I think, new ideas, and now there's 170. And as you've said, 25 origin stories, and we know there are more to come. I just can't believe that this has been achieved in 24 hours, and finding everyone is inspiring me, and I feel buzzed. I felt pretty buzzed before, but now I feel even more buzzed. And just want to say thanks to the whole team at TCLP for making this possible. I can't believe we've done this virtually, being the technophobe that I am. So it's just amazing. So two main themes that have struck me. I was only going to talk about one, but I've expanded it to two after this morning's session. So I don't know whether anybody is on the line that joined the climate engagement and education session. This was, I facilitated this, but the expertise was provided by climate outreach, and there's a Greta's clause and a Greta's law that results from their work. And the origin story of both is, or that underpins both, is that the policies and lifestyle changes required to achieve current climate targets cannot be implemented without a strong social mandate and broad public acceptance of the scale and urgency of the issue. The second limb is that the public has a fundamental right to know in order to make informed decisions about all significant elements of their lives that will be affected by climate change. And what I hadn't appreciated in my ignorance was that this is a fundamental part of the Paris Agreement. This is a legal obligation that countries have, but actually it's falling by the wayside. During this session, some fantastic, along with Greta's clause and Greta's law, which has been developed from climate outreach's work before the hackathon, some fantastic new ideas came out with, and so thanks to Cedric, Ali and Hannah for those. And Sarah, the main point, the reason why I'm raising this, and Sarah will be talking about this in a few minutes, is that it became clear to me during the session that one of the problems we have with using the clauses that have come out of TCLP is that we're still having to fight the cause, if you like, with people that we work with clients. But actually, if this climate engagement and education is rolled out as it should be, if it improves, if there is if this is taken forward using the ideas that have come out of TCLP and other work, then it will win the hearts and minds, or it will be part of the work of winning the hearts and minds and making the rollout of the work we're doing so much easier. So that was my main, the first main theme. The second, my main takeaway, was in relation to debt finance and climate change, and in particular the role of the financial sector in influencing and changing behaviour through model clauses. We've had feedback from the debt finance and climate change session that lending clauses are capable of making big environmental difference and are easy to integrate into precedent banks. And I know that through my own job as well. But the real sticking point is, as mentioned earlier, getting them into client documents and winning hearts and minds. Companies are a long way behind financial institutions in being ESG ready, and the session generated some very real and practical ideas for helping companies comply with their climate obligations. For example, producing, can TCLP or should TCLP produce a checklist guidance document that companies can use to walk through exactly what they have to do in order to be in a position to comply with their reporting and other requirements of the green and sustainability guidelines, for example, of the Loan Market Association. And this was a recurring theme in the client engagement and education session too. We use checklists for other obligations that we have, for example, GDPR, money laundering. So this is another use of that checklist guidance process. The second potential deliverable, a set of principles focused on green and sustainability actions that an SME or leverage borrower, rather than the bigger financial institutions, bigger institutional borrowers, would be in a position to deliver. It was also suggested that the capital markets playbook be augmented with materials that are relevant to debt capital markets, and we need to make sure that market participants have access to and can benefit from the capital markets playbook. So finance is playing, my takeaway is that finance is playing or can play a really big role in this. Another recurring theme from the finance sessions and the finance ideas that are being generated, and it's recurred throughout the first three climate contract playbooks and came up today, is the Loan Market Association and their model agreements. They've already produced green loan principles and sustainability linked loan principles, but I'm getting the impression from all the ideas and origin stories that are coming out that reference the Loan Market Association that people think more can be done. It'll be really interesting to see how we can consolidate all the ideas and origin stories and perhaps take them forward with the LMA. I know this is something that Lucy and Becky at Practical Law and others are very, so just saying what I said at the start. I'm enthused, inspired, and ready for further action.
Thank you so much, Diane. Zaneta, can I ask you to give some of your thoughts from the theme?
Yes, thank you, Becky. Thank you, Diane. So I want to start as well, very similarly to Diane, with my own reflections. So for me, this was the first hackathon with the Chancery project of this setting with 564 participants, as Ben has updated in the chat. And I have to second everything that Diane has said. So extreme excitement and kind of like plan of action, I hope, for everybody in the room today, or even people who couldn't make it to the room today. I have to also say that I'm somewhat sad because the hackathon cannot be in one room with everybody. And the reason is because I feel that certain people would deserve an applause for their hard work and 24-hour work. I also, as I said, I'm excited, but I'm also quite exhausted, which I believe I'm not the only person on the call. It has been 24 hours around the world. And this might not be a very standard way, but this is what Ben did for us 3 months ago for our own hackathon. So I would like to ask everybody to unmute themselves, and I would like to give heads up and shout outs to the Chancery Project core team. So I do have the names I might omit, but so Mingzi, Jenny, Ben, Matt, Ellie, Becky, Thea, Matilda, many more people behind us. If you could unmute yourself and just give them a huge applause so that they can actually hear it, because they can't have it in the room, guys. Just so that they can hear how much we appreciate it. Thank you. So I just wanted to do this because I think there are so many people who cannot hear the applause in the room, and they have done a great work and great 24-hour shift to actually bring us all here. And I think it's really important for all of us to appreciate that, even in this setting. So having finished that, as I'm excited about what's going to happen, I'm very ready to start drafting with the teams I have facilitated, and I have done only 2 facilitation sessions. So I will naturally focus on origin stories and ideas that came out of those, because I'm more acquainted with them. Now, having said that, I have been completely excited and inspired by how many themes we have had. So there was transport and infrastructure, there was energy, there was real estate, and also asset management. So everything you can think about. Now I'm going to focus on energy and rewilding simply because I understand them a bit more than others. Rewilding was one of the sessions I co-facilitated this morning. And the ideas that came out of the session were so inspirational. So for those of you who don't know, rewilding is the idea of letting nature go wild and not really managing it for the purpose of a single species. So it's a very innovative idea in Europe, but it's taking off very fast. And my colleagues this morning came out with fascinating ideas about how we can use even cities to rewild. So one of the ideas that came out of this morning was wilding commercial roofs. And that was by Paul Grellan, my colleague, and he suggested that why don't we obligate the contractors to use unused spaces of buildings for creating a rewilded space, such as lawn, or even, if possible, in infrastructure, to actually put trees up there. He was suggesting that this would obviously have a huge carbon sequestration impact, but also provide habitat for migratory birds and provide other benefits such as rain retention. And again, I found it fascinating because this is a combination of a wild and natural space and then something like a city infrastructure, which definitely struck chord with me. Another idea I would like to highlight as something that I found fascinating this morning was the idea of natural capital retention and regeneration by Scott Lowe. And he suggested that when developments are being constructed and developed, why not obligate the developers to then regenerate a certain fixed percentage of green space after the development is finished? And again, this is the idea of remediation, regeneration, which could be implemented and could have a huge impact on carbon sequestration, but also side effects also for human health and psychological health of people living in the cities we all now feel under the lockdown. And in the spirit of Chancery Project pushing boundaries and ideas, The final idea I want to highlight from the morning rewilding session was by Melanie Martin, and she introduced an idea which might be quite, for common law lawyers, English lawyers, quite strange, and that was the idea of environmental personhood. So as common law lawyers, we give personhood to intangible objects like companies or trusts. And very often when you say, why shouldn't we have a mother nature as a legal person, people are shocked and laugh you off because it just sounds outrageous. There are countries around the world, including New Zealand, Colombia, and India, that recognize legal personality of rivers, ecosystems, and national parks. And Melanie this morning played with the idea of, what if we did it? What if we lawyers in England recognize a legal personhood of certain objects so that they can enforce their rights through representatives? And as much as I myself feel it might not be time under English law to do so, I wanted to highlight this idea in the name of some sort of pushing of boundaries that the Chancery Project does during these hackathons. And this idea, as much as it might be too nascent right now, might come into fruition in a few years. So that was my take on rewilding, which was very fresh this morning. And just transferring to the origin story gallery, which I'm going to focus on energy table, energy theme that generated several origin stories. And unsurprisingly, many of them were focused on oil rigs in the North Sea and their removal, which is unsurprising given that these are going to be stranded assets very soon. There was an EMEA origin story, which focused on how to remove these structures in an environmentally friendly manner. So obligations of using very low carbon ships and very efficient way of removing the rigs so that environmental and climate damage is minimized. However, the clause that struck me, and this is where I like to connect rewilding to energy, I call it a rewilded energy clause, which is the Dylan clause, which, to my surprise and complete ignorance when I read it, suggests that we do not decommission oil rigs. And I was just shocked, like, how dare you not to decommission oil rigs? That's terrible. However, the clause goes on to suggest if we leave them in the North Sea, they could be colonized by ecosystems and animals that live in the North Sea, and they could create so-called artificial reefs. Now, I have never heard of it, so my first reaction was doubt. This is not possible, certainly. But having read a bit before this session, actually, it is possible. And I found it fascinating how this clause is trying to not necessarily remedy the harm created, but maybe repurpose it. So instead of repurposing the rig to provide natural habitat and then all the natural ecosystem services that would be provided by such natural habitat. And to me, this origin story also represents how Chancellor Lane project pushes boundaries of thinking for us to consider maybe not only how to reverse harm, but also how to repurpose the harm we have done. And that's why I decided to highlight it, also because I love the phrase rewilded energy. I might be too proud to come up with it just now, but I definitely do think that this story does represent a lot of innovative thinking that the Chanceling Project encourages all of us to engage in. So that is all for me. Thank you very much, Becky. And I pass over to Sarah, I trust.
Sarah Oliver Scemla could give us.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. And so I'm going to focus on using model clauses. So the next step of the puzzle, once the clauses are drafted, what do we do with them? How do we work to plug the clauses into our business as usual contracts? And there's a first effort that's been made to translate the clauses, so draft them in Australian law, Irish law, and US law. And those efforts are being headed by Phoebe for Australia, Andrew for Ireland, and Roger in the US. And so there were different sessions on the different for the different jurisdictions. But I attended the EMEA session, and it was very interesting to see what people had to say, the obstacles they were facing, and also the suggestions they had for how the Chancery Lane project could help move forward in getting buy-in from stakeholders internally. And it was interesting. So what was quite interesting, obviously, the experience for in-house counsel is very different to that of law firms. And one thing that came up was that law firms were saying, well, if clients aren't asking for it, it's very difficult for us to suggest it. And also, if you're putting the clause in, the night before, the lawyer gets all these extra clauses they have to read in documentation. That's quite painful, and you could annoy your client, and obviously that's not productive for anyone. And in-house, what people are saying is, lawyers are saying we need to buy in from the business, and the business saying, well, we like the idea, but do the lawyers agree, and is this market standard? And one thing we read on is that what would be useful is layering. So the more people hear about these clauses in different contexts, the more likely they are to start thinking of them as a norm or accept them. So really just repetition. So if law firms include the clauses in the contracts they're sending to clients, then clients may or may not agree to them in first instance, but they'll get used to seeing them, and they'll get used to the idea of including clauses in these contracts. And then if the business hear lawyers and law firms talking about these contracts, these clauses, then they'll also start assimilating the ideas and the concepts behind the clauses. And all that will lead at some point for it to become a norm and to become a market. And we also discussed the fact that we're not actually that far off it becoming a regulatory obligation to include a lot of the points that are set out in these clauses. I think maybe 6 months to a year off, which is very, very little. So the time spent familiarizing yourself with the clauses, talking about the clauses internally, talking about it with peers is very useful, so that when regulators announce obligations and set out the granularity of requirements for financial institutions, insurances, supply chains, there's an army of people who know what the Chancery documentation has to offer and is ready to move forward and present that information to relevant stakeholders internally. And that's really work that we should be doing now, because it takes a while to get comfortable with all the clauses and all the documentation that the Chancery project has drafted in the past 18 months. That was one point. Another point that was raised was that it'd be useful to publish success stories, and we'll be looking into this in the next few months. So what works, do's and don'ts, what works, what's been helpful, what's a challenge, and what's better left to later on in the game, what you should start with. So that was one point that is going to be considered. Another point that was raised was having information on the advantages of each clause within the origin story. So having just an extra paragraph saying, these are the advantages for the business. This is the advantage in terms of money saving. What's in it for me? If you go into a stakeholder and saying, what's in it for me? Yes, I understand that the climate change issue, but beyond that, persuade me. You've got a bit of information to work with. Another point that was raised was the idea of having sector-focused events, so discussing the use of model clauses for specific areas, so capital markets, arbitration, litigation, etc., and really focusing on, so you're only bringing together lawyers who have that particular expertise and who are going to be discussing those specific points internally and need to be armed with the knowledge of tactics, strategy, and a good understanding of every single clause relating to their area. Another idea that was put forward, which I really liked, was a buddy system. So I'm lucky enough at Bank of America to have a colleague, Simon, who I can exchange ideas with, and we work on this very much together, and that's great. But it'd be really nice for people who are doing this on their own, and can be quite a long journey, as Becky and I were saying. It can take a while to find the right person who's going to support you and help you navigate the internal stakeholders within the organization. And it'd be great to have someone who you can bounce ideas off and exchange what worked, what didn't, ask for feedback, get suggestions. So that's something that's being explored as well. One point that was also raised was someone said that it'd be useful to know who has managed to include clauses in documentation as BAU. Now that's quite difficult for the Chancery Lane project to move forward in terms of confidentiality. Some people are able to share that information, others aren't. But it's something that will be considered in terms of what can happen, what could happen around that, because it's true that even I see internally it's useful if we can say our peers are doing this. Here's the name of two people who are including this in documentation. We are not outliers if we do this, but it's not always easy to have those discussions. So all that brings together a number of ideas to help support the Child Surveying Project community in moving forward in terms of implementing the texts into their workplace documentation. Another point that was discussed before I finish is sharing resources. So slides that are being prepared to speak to internal stakeholders, sharing that information on Slack. So you say, these are the slides that we use. This is helpful information. You might want to try this. People were very responsive to this slide. It really spoke to our risks team, our compliance team, our business team. So lots of great ideas, lots of very practical ideas, lots to think about as well in terms of priorities and how things would work, but also a lot of discussion about future dialogue and interaction on Slack. So I think you'll be seeing a lot in this space in the coming months. On that note, I'll hand back to you, Becky.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you to all three of you. That I think has given us a really good overview of just the amount of work and the variety of ideas. And I'm very much looking forward to taking them all forward with you. I'm going to do a little bit of a brave thing here. We like mixing things up at DCLP. I'm going to throw the floor open for a couple of minutes if anyone would like to unmute themselves and jump in and just say literally a couple of lines about what they have done. It's okay if you don't want to do that, but I'd like to offer the opportunity to anyone if they do. And I'm very comfortable sitting in silence for an extra minute.
Is there anything that people would like to see move forward as a priority, maybe? There's like a number one thing that people want to see move in the next month that would make most sense for them to focus on.
Actually, I guess one thing that I would just throw out there as people are going away and drafting new clauses, because this came up in the infrastructure session this morning that I was facilitating. When people are sitting down and starting to put pen to paper, they should, first take another close look at some of the existing materials in the playbook, because a lot of those, could be used as a starting position and just make the process probably a bit more efficient. Came up one of the existing clauses, I think, could be adapted for some of the ideas. And also, just to remind everyone there.
Thanks, Karen. That's really helpful. Always good to have a plug for our existing materials. Would anyone else like to contribute? Well, in which case I shall move on to the next part of my talk. I need to say a few thank yous. Zaneta has already very kindly said a few thank yous, but you can see from this slide, there are a cast of thousands to thank, and I'm unfortunately, we don't have quite enough time to go through everyone individually, but there are a few names up there of people who have worked so tirelessly to make this event an event like this happen. Of course, when you have an event of this size, it can only be through a huge collaborative effort. And for my part, seeing the collaboration that's gone into creating this event, I feel sure that there'll be a sufficient amount of collaboration to continue to create the clauses that we will then use. The list there is just obviously people who worked behind the scenes, like Alicia Lawson in particular, but also our fantastic facilitators who have guided you all through the drafting exercises and through the potential tech minefield in the last 24 hours. And then I also have to thank the TCLP core team. So, and on behalf of all of you participants, I have to say thank you to them all. So we have the silver-tongued Matilda Graham, whose eloquent and clear explanations have illuminated the process we followed. Thank you, Matilda. And Thea and Mingzi, who are very new recruits, have very quietly worked in the background to ensure that everything has run smoothly. So thank you to you. And of course, where would we be without our eagle-eyed Jenny Ramos, who has held all of the threads of all of the sessions in her brain over the last few weeks. And I can honestly say she's not dropped a single ball, which is amazing. And then we have Ellie as our own personal climate expert, who has ensured that the focus of this event climate has remained front and center. And then Ben, our Sherpa hero, who is just magicked the whole IT framework of this hack, and of course, so much more. I don't know how you do it, Ben. It's amazing. And lastly, but definitely not least, Matt, our mastermind, who can churn out so many climate solutions that it can be really hard to keep up. I want to tell all of you, you are simply the best. And now everyone, look in the mirror. A special thank you goes to all of you. You've turned up and you've engaged with a process that you weren't quite sure how it was going to happen, and it's probably outside a lot of your comfort zones. Certainly the tech's outside my comfort zone. And you have picked up that climate conscious drafting pen. Well done. And I hope when you look in the mirror, you don't just see a scary lawyer, but you see an awakened climate conscious activist of a new kind who understands the net zero transition that we need to make and has a plan how to get there. So, superheroes, what can you do next? Well, you have to finish your drafting. If it's not drafted, it won't be used. If it won't be used, it's not saving emissions. So your next mission is to get your drafting submitted to TCLP by the 27th of November. But your mission doesn't end there. Please think about where you can use TCLP's clauses in all of your transactions. And then don't just think about it, use them. Also, you can ask your know-how lawyers if these clauses can be incorporated into your firm's precedents. And if that's not enough, you can get involved in TCLP drafting at future hackathons, or you can even hold your own hack. I know there are a number of firms on this call who are planning to do that. And then just to make the point that Sarah said about layering, tell other fee earners about TCLP and encourage them to use our resources. You are our ambassadors out there in the world. You are the people that are going to make this happen. And remember, when you change the precedent, you change the world. Thank you very much. And just as a sort of tidying up exercise, I have a couple of points I want to mention. The shout out on the t-shirt competition that we announced at the beginning of this hack, the shout out has to go to Laura Hamblin in the APAC session, who managed to wear, I think it was a dolphin, it could have been a whale, earmuffs for the entirety of her session. So well done to Laura. And then lastly, just to say that the National Organising Pro Bono Committee have been in contact with us this morning to say that there are drinks at 6 p.m. in the link that we will post in the chat. So if you haven't had enough hacking and enough pro bono work, there's another opportunity for you this evening. So thank you, everyone. That's the end of the hack now. I very much hope we'll see you again in the coming months and also at the hack next year. Thank you.